All right, if any of you are wondering how I made the Mahler 2 video, oh, that's Kitty's feeder. Kitty's feeder just went off, and Kitty is eating the food. If you haven't seen the collaboration I did with my colleagues in the San Antonio Symphony and the San Antonio Master Singers, there's a link in the description below, and so you can check that out. We're using three major pieces of software that I'm going to jump back and forth between. On the audio side, we have Logic Pro. On the video side, we have Final Cut Pro and Motion. And all the performers are recording themselves on smartphones. It's not done simultaneously. Everyone at their own pace just records their part and sends to me. And so our challenge, first of all, is to make sure that we're all in the same time. And so the first thing that we did is made sure that our conductor, Sebastian Lang-Lessing, recorded his conducting performance first. And then essentially we send that out to all the performers. So I'll just give you a little sample. If we can hop over to my computer here. And we'll go to the Mahler 2 project. And got a zillion folders for all the different things in this. So here's just a sample of Sebastian conducting. Just using his memory and imagination of the piece, he's running through the entire thing and making his own conducting performance. And now it's sort of my job to take this video and make it abundantly clear, audio and visually, to the performer how to play and sort of in what time frame. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over to our our video editing program, which is Final Cut Pro. So we'll let that load. All right. So I'm just going to we're going to hop over to essentially an empty project. So here's an empty project in Final Cut Pro. I'm just going to hop over to my file viewer in Mac, just your file finder, and I'm just going to drag over that sample video we were looking at of Sebastian conducting. I'm just going to drag it over to what we call the timeline in this video editor. So the timeline is sort of the main area of manipulation. You can play sort of your resultant project from here. There's a red line that is sort of your playhead, which is kind of represents where you are in the project in the video. The viewer, which shows you the video, and it also has the timing right below it. So we have 24 seconds, and also even down to the frames. So right now we have 30 frames a second, and that's appearing there as well. And then we have sort of our file assets on the top left, and on the top right we've got an area where you can manipulate different aspects of each element. So let me just show you how we would, for really the whole first half of this project, I have the score of Mahler's Second Symphony always on sort of the right-hand side of my screen. So let's pull that up. By the way, I got this from imslp.org. It's a fantastic resource. We can actually just hop over there together if you haven't been. It just takes me a second to load. Woo! It's root beer, I promise. All right. imslp.org. This is a great resource for classical musicians, especially for finding scores and parts. I'm just going to pop in Mahler 2. As you see, all the scores pop up down here that you can download. They take donations. This is not an endorsement. You can also check out the parts. You've got individual parts of the piece, which I use to send out to the performers as well. So it was super easy just to distribute this entire project. All right. So just using the score, I wanted to add rehearsal numbers to the conductor video for the performer's aid, so they know where they are as they're performing. So rehearsal number is essentially just a milestone within a piece, so it can be a letter or a number. And so I'm just going to use this program called Screenshot, which is part of Mac OS, which you can do a screenshot of your entire screen, or you can do a selection. In this case, I'm just doing a small selection, which will include the rehearsal number and some accompanying kind of data. And it's going to show up on the right-hand side of my screen. Essentially what this is going to do is generate a picture file that will show up in my desktop just on the right-hand side here. I'm just going to grab that. You see I've done it before. I'm going to grab and drag it right over to the timeline of my video editor. And so essentially what we're looking at in this program is video layers. You can stack layer upon layer, and whatever layer is on top essentially is going to supersede the layer on the bottom. So you see that it completely obscures Sebastian right now. We're just going to make it a little smaller. If I select it and go to the top right, I'm just going to grab that slider, pull it down to, I don't know, 40-some%. If I click this little transform box, it allows me to click and drag it and move it to about there. I can just click done, and there it is. I'm going to, I don't know, we'll just say that rehearsal 39 occurs right there. If I select this, hit Command T, it actually adds fade in and fade out on the beginning and ends of the clip. It's an interesting little shortcut. And then the last thing, I'm actually going to reduce the opacity, sort of how opaque this is. I'm just going to draw it down. So I could actually bring it all the way down to 0 and it disappears. So essentially how clear your element is. And I'm just going to put it at maybe about 75%. So it doesn't draw the eye so much to the performer that they're staring at it, but it just is sort of an element that helps them stay on track. All right. So, as a chef would do, here's one that I prepared earlier. And so you see I've done all the rehearsal numbers on top, these elements that little pop up here, these little representations. By the way, just to explain, the video is essentially represented by a rectangle, as you see, and we also have audio elements as well that we'll get into. So I generated a sort of a countdown from 10 to 1. There's a little feature in Final Cut called generators, and you can go in here and create those. So anyway, let me just play from the beginning. Sebastian takes a few moments and begins, and there's rehearsal 39 right where the viola tremolo begins. The reason I put the countdown, by the way, is just to give the performer time to get set up, start the video, and play. Especially for the violas who are coming in right at the beginning. You have to set up your phone to record yourself, and another device, you have to start that video. So I didn't want it starting right away, so they have to scramble to get started. So I'm just giving them a little bit of time to get set and record. All right, so the last bit that I want to do to enhance this is I'm going to add, should the performer so choose to have a click track, to have an earpiece just to have an sort of a audio reinforcement, we want that to be an option. So I'm going to generate a click track. So we're going to hop over to our audio editing program called Logic Pro 10. And hopefully it'll open. It's been giving me, I'm using a screen capture to kind of show what I'm doing on my screen, and it might be messing with a plugin. Oh, good. All right. So let's start a new project. Let's show you how this works. It's asking me just to make a new track, an audio track. You have the option of doing audio tracks where you can hook up a microphone to your computer and actually record something, bring it into this program. You also have the ability to make software instruments that are generated from sort of a MIDI map. And so let me just show you how that works in a moment here. I'm going to drag over this. I'm going to actually, as a reference, let's just say that I've already exported the Conductor video with all those rehearsal numbers from Final Cut Pro. So we'll say we saved that already. And so let's just find the one I saved. It's all theoretical. Let's just say I did. Here it is. SOL for Sebastian Lang-Lessing video, and it has no click. So I'm just going to take this from my file viewer, drag it over to my audio editor, and it gives me an option of opening the movie and or extracting the audio. So essentially, this capability is really cool. If you're a composer, and you're especially if you're scoring a film, and you want to score and add audio elements and music to existing video, this allows you to import the video into this program and sort of add your elements. So that's essentially what we're doing. We're not doing anything so interesting as scoring a film, but we're adding a click track, which is important, an important step right now. So we're gonna open the movie, yes. We don't need any audio because he doesn't have any audio that's pertinent right now. So we're just gonna hit OK. It's asking me about sampling rate, making sure that it matches, and also that the frame rate matches from my video to my project. It's technical stuff, but it's important too. So essentially this opens up. I can resize it to like that, and if I decide I want to get it out of the way completely, it appears in the sidebar here. If I just move it over to the left, and if I play to preview, and again, this program, just like Final Cut, it has a playhead, looks very similar. You can move it left and right. And up at the top here, I can choose to see the timing. We're 12 seconds in. Sebastian appears. And here's his first cue, right at 39. So essentially, we want to add a click track to this. The best way to do this is add a percussion instrument, I would think. I want to avoid the beeps because they're just really annoying. So I'm not going to add any sort of synthesizer sounds per se. I'm just going to stick to sampled percussion sounds. So let's go ahead and hit the plus sign right here to add a new track. I want to select software instrument. So as I said, this is a super awesome program. You can add all kind of different instruments into this and make amazing music. And I do love, whenever I do scoring and stuff like that, I'm using Logic. I just love this program. So I believe I used a studio percussion kit. I'm just gonna search for that in this left margin here. It allows me to search through all kind of different instruments. I select that. It essentially loads that instrument into this track here, and I can have any number of tracks here in the margin, and you'll see in the future how many tracks you can load up in here. And then I'm gonna write, so this kind of moving forward in time, this little row and column, I can right click and create an empty MIDI region. And then I can double click to edit this region. So essentially, I'm going to create musical notes that trigger the sampled sounds in this instrument. So I'm gonna I used clave. Clave is sort of that plasticky thing that you can strike. I think it's plastic. All right, let me just make sure. That's the sound we're looking for. So just by using the pencil tool, I switched to the pencil tool. It's my secondary tool. I can hold Command and just kind of click, and it produces this. You can see it's lined up with clave, and these are the measure numbers up here, which are not relevant right now because the measures don't matter. Essentially, time is fluctuating right now. So this is if you were to create a project from scratch and you wanted to line up measures. But anyway, so let's line this up with what Sebastian is doing. So I can manipulate the playhead. Notice the playhead up here is linked to the playhead down here in the editing section, which is really handy. So let's catch his first cue. I'm gonna play, notice right here, oh, so I came in a little early. It came a little early. Okay, there it is. Okay, so lined up exactly with this downbeat. And then for the secondary upbeats, I'm gonna use a wood block, just something to differentiate. There's that sound. So let's just drag it over here. Maybe a little earlier. All right, let me make this a little more visible so you can see Sebastian. And okay, that's pretty close. Let's back it up a bit. All right, so that's just a sample of how we would create the first 2 clicks, I could just continue on. And this is essentially what I did. I just kept making clicks and boops and things, and you essentially have to do this for every single downbeat and upbeat. So I manually had to go through, whatever that, manual laboring all the way through this, right? And so let me, again, as a chef would do, here's one that I prepared earlier. I'm just gonna locate a file. Pew, pew, pew. There we go. Okay. So here's the project where you can see all these little hashes in the multi-track view. If I click on it, it shows me where they are all located. And we can click and play through that. So essentially now we have a click track that corresponds to our video. And all we're going to do now is click and save that. In Logic, when you're exporting your audio elements, it's called bouncing. Let's bounce. So we're just going to bounce the audio. Save it to our desktop. We're just going to bounce that up. Definitely got to have a few more swigs of root beer. Meow. All right, so now that we have this element, we're going to hop back over to our video editor, which is, if you remember, Final Cut Pro. We've got this project already set up with the countdown, Sebastian, and the rehearsal numbers. So essentially we're going to click and drag that file that we just made in our audio editor. We're just going to drag that over to our timeline. You notice it appears right here in the timeline. I've got some other files that I've disabled that I used previously. These are actually finished mixes that I made. And rather than deleting them, I actually left them there and just hit disable so they could remain there in case I needed them later. So anyway, we're pretending like we're at the beginning of our journey. And you see, those of you who've worked with sound before, you're going to see the waveform of the file, which is essentially the amplitude sound energy essentially we're seeing. And each of these is just the clicks, right? Those are all of the clicks. And let's go ahead and preview this to make sure it makes sense. Takes a few moments, and the cue. Right. All right, so we're all good. And so I went through the whole thing, made sure everything lined up. And essentially what we do from the video editor is just save this whole file, this whole project, export it to a video. We send it out to all of the musicians, and essentially they make their performances and they send back to me. And then we're going to go back to Logic Pro and actually mix together all of that audio. So let's make a new project in Logic. Okay. There it is. I'm just going to resize. We can make a new track. So I'm just going to go to the folder where I've saved all the musician videos. Boom, boom. Where are we at? M2 for Mahler 2 musician videos. Here they all are. Just sort of array of formats. Again, 95% of pretty much everybody are doing these on their smartphones. Occasionally someone does something fancy, like having an audio recorder is always great for quality. But essentially these are all just people, setting their phone on their stand. And so let's just do a sample. The piece starts with a viola tremolo, so let's pull over Allison. all we have to do is actually just click and drag. Let's try that again. There we go. Oh, well, we can do that first. So here's what we're going to, we're back to this option box. So we don't actually want to open the movie right now. We just want to extract the audio from the video file and work with that. So we're going to uncheck Open Movie. We're going to click Extract the Audio Track, hit OK. Essentially just miraculously pulls the audio from that video and it appears here. Oops. And the thing I always forget to do first is we're going to, the finished file that we made of Sebastian conducting with the click track, we're going to pull that into this project too as a reference. So, because essentially it's nice to see where he is in his ictus and just have that as a reference as I'm adding different tracks. So I have that saved. Conductor video with click. I'm going to drag that over, and this time I want to open the movie and extract the audio track because that has the click track in the audio. So let's hit OK. It's going to load that up for us. All right, so it shows us the video. I'm going to minimize it. It shows up here in the left margin. And I'm going to, by the way, there's this weird feature of Logic. You have to unlock SMPTE position to move elements around. It's just a weird, I don't know why they do it. So I'm just going to drag this all the way to the left, right where our project starts. I'm just going to zoom in by hitting Command and the arrow key to the right and just make sure that is exactly smack dab in the beginning. All right, so now we have our first instrument of our orchestra present and our conductor, essentially. And you can see kind of where, with these waveforms, let's make them a little bigger. I'm gonna go over here. You can grab this slider and make things a little wider to see the waveforms. See, now they're humongous. There's nothing to hide. Now I can see everything. I'm going to resize Allison's viola track. I'm just going to kind of move her approximately to where it looks like Sebastian is starting. Let's pop the headphones on and see how we're doing. All right, so pretty close. Pretty close. She starts a tremolo about where the first click begins. I'm just going to, this volume slider, you can address the volume and adjust the volume with that slider, okay? And so this is the sort of the premise that you use to, essentially, I'm gonna add then, using the score on the right-hand side of my screen, I'm gonna add all the violas, then the violins, then the cellos, and the basses, and so on and so forth. It's just all the winds, all the brass, all the percussion, the soloists, and so I'm just kind of stacking things as I go, making sure, first of all, that everything's lined up, and then sort of mixing all the levels. So let me show you, again, as the chef would do, the one I prepared earlier. Boom! Here it is. Okay. All right, so now you can see this massive project. All of these things you see here, these little rectangles, are different tracks. So you see violin 1, violin 2, viola, cello, bass, harp, flute, yada yada. It goes on and on, right? All the way down to sopranos, altos of the choir, down to bass. And so the different varying sections where they enter and exit. So for this, I have the accompanying Sebastian video on the left margin as a reference, and I have his click track actually muted at the moment, but I can at any moment unmute that just to kind of hear the reference of where everything's going to enter. So let me just give you a sample of the beginning here. Right. So really amazing capabilities in this program. just from cell phones, you're able to make some pretty decent sounding audio. So again, just to show you a capability of mixing, if I press A on the keyboard, what this does is it pulls up what's called the automation view. And these little yellow lines allow me to manipulate the volume of each track over time. And these little data points are where I can adjust the volume dynamically throughout the piece. So I use that feature quite a bit to kind of bring things up and down when I needed to. It'd be essentially if you were in a studio and you have a mixer and you're kind of dynamically recording those levels, I can just come in here and click a data point. For example, right here, there's nothing here at the moment, but I can just click here and I can bring, say that there was something there. I could just bring those levels up. So let me just exit out of that. So that is a super cool capability of this program. I'm sure very standard among programs of the like. Also another feature I did up here, we have the capability, if you were doing a sort of your own scoring project, you can adjust the time signature, things like that. It's not relevant here because the time is so fluid. There was really no point to me adjusting that. But I did create markers for rehearsal numbers up here. So you see in the video, there's rehearsal 39 beginning, and I just made a little marker up here for 39:40 all the way to the end of the piece, up to 51. I even made a little one that said last note at the end here. So there you go. You can zoom in, and you can use the scissor tool as well. To chop up these rectangles of sound, essentially what we have here. I feel a little bit like Jacob Collier showing you my Logic project. So it's actually quite interesting. 150 tracks for Moon River. The guy's a genius. So let me just show you a few sections of this piece. Again, as I said, most of what I'm doing is making sure everything lines up. Everything is mixed to the correct level. And that's about it. Getting rid of extraneous sounds. You can see I removed all these areas here in the middle because that just kind of creates, when you're recording on your phone, there's probably some room sound, some hissing in the signal. So I just kind of, if there is a section where lots of instruments were not playing, this is where the chorale begins with the brass and the chorus and the strings lay out. So I chopped that just out of the project. So here's another section here, right where the chorus comes in. Apologies, let's go a little further back. All right. Please. Of course, at any time you can solo, which just means to isolate any tracks at any time. So if I just wanted to hear brass, let's say just the trombones, of course. What else? I play trombone in case anyone doesn't know. Okay, so there's all of the waveforms lining up, sort of the amplitude of the sound signal that is visually there. And you can always use this as a great visual cue to make sure everything is lining up. So all of our stuff is approximately lining up here. If it's not, then you can always manipulate by using the scissor, kind of the blade tool, chopping it up and just manipulating it a little bit. Again, we don't have the luxury of having all of the data on stage to play with one another, so some amount of editing is going to be needed to make this all fit together. So again, let's add tuba. And if we take the solo off here, let's hear the whole context again. Just gorgeous. Gotta love Mahler. So moving forward in the piece, here's just a section where the soloists come in. So again, just to talk about my workflow for this, the first thing that I had to do then, I did not have the singers initially. So the first project was to mix all of the orchestral instruments together, and I made a preliminary mix of just the orchestra. And so I could mute all of the tracks just to give you a sampling of that, but you can imagine without the voices, it sounds great, but it's incomplete. And so I sent that as a reference to our vocal principals in the choir and to the soloists. And so they used that as a reference to record their parts. Then, so essentially at that point I had the soloists, our soprano soloist and alto soloist, Janai Bridges and Deanna Braywick, and then we had our vocal principals in the master singers. I had a soprano, alto, tenor, 2 tenors and 2 basses, I think, for the divisi parts. And then I used those, I put them in a mix as a reference for the rest of the choir. So I sort of essentially gradually added those parts, made a mix. I actually included that. I went back to Final Cut Pro, exported from Logic that audio, went back to Final Cut Pro. You can see all these little areas down here. This says Mahler 2 alto mix. That's essentially all of the vocal principal parts, but I mixed the alto singer up so that all the altos could have an oral reference for their singing that was sort of customized to their vocal range. So I was trying to be as thorough as possible. I did that for all the vocal rangers, and I even did a full SATB, soprano, alto, tenor, bass, equal mix as well. That went out to the choir. They sent back then their reference, their performance. And then I had all of the building blocks I needed to make the full audio performance, the full piece. And so now, one last bit I could talk about is I just added a little, maybe a bit more than a little reverb in this project. You can hear a bit of what this sounds like without the reverb. Kind of dry. Man, so it's almost like a little rough when it's dry like that. It really helps so much to create just a performing hall in real life does so much to let the sound reverberate and coalesce. So any of us who are musicians who have rehearsed in a dry room or practiced in a dry room, you can relate. It can be a helpful tool to really hear everything, but it's not always pretty. So let's just add this reverb filter. And by the way, this space designer in Logic is great. If I double click, I can just show you that there's lots of different settings for different types of halls. You could even put yourself in a bathroom. The number of seconds is the amount of delay that you can create. So I could demonstrate that, but you could play around with that if you have this program. You might even be able to do it in GarageBand. So let's hear that section just with a little bit of reverb. So a little bit nicer, it allows all of the sound to kind of come together. So I think with a little bit of reverb, even audio that's recorded on a smartphone sounds decent. So now, so assume that we've taken this whole mix, this whole project, and mixed it down to a WAV file. I then take that WAV file and I'm going to bring it into Final Cut, our video editor. And you can see, I'm just going to disable the click track thing I did here. Here is one of the final mixes I did here. You see it's in the bottom. It's kind of, they're all in stacks, but all of my audio assets are down here, and then your video assets are up here. So you can kind of mix everything together. And I just made sure that everything lined up once again. And so let's just test that just to verify. Now we have Sebastian conducting with the actual mixed down audio. Great. So I made many different revisions to the audio, by the way, all the way through this process because I kept hearing stuff and I was like, ah. So that's the way it goes. You're always going to be revising with these kinds of things. So now comes the task of taking all the videos that everyone sent and kind of syncing them back to the final mix. So essentially all this material we have here, we're just going to start stacking all the video layers on top just because I don't want to make a new project for every video. So the purpose of this is to make sure all the videos are all well timed and kind of trimmed. And also I'm going to re-save them out of this program, each of the video layers, so that they're all in sort of a digestible format that our graphics program can then use. So that's our workflow. Right now we're just using Final Cut to sort of prepare all the video to go so it can be chomped up and digested by the graphics program, which is Motion. So say that let me just give you a sample of how we do this. I would go to a folder that has all my videos. Let's start with the musicians. How about we'll start with our concert master, Eric Grotz. Where is he at? Violin 1. Grotz, here he is, right? Here's his video, just to give it a little preview. I'm just going to click and drag this over to my timeline, and we kind of want it to start somewhere in here. Okay, and rather than going through the process of actually having to resync this, because I've done this so many times, I'm going to go to the one I prepared earlier, as the chef would do. I called this project Stacks, because it's a stack of videos. All right, so you can see, if I scroll up, I've disabled all these clips right now, but there's like the stack of all of the members of the orchestra and all of their corresponding videos, and all of them are in effect synchronized with one another. They're all starting their playing with one another relative to my audio that I have down here. Here's a version of our full audio mix. So I use the full audio mix as a reference. I've got Sebastian's video here disabled because it's kind of darkened right now. Let's enable Eric's clip so we can see and hear it. And if you go kind of towards the bottom of this rectangle, I can kind of drag up the audio material. I can kind of mix that up just so you can see it. So we can just see where he comes in and verify. Oh goodness, sorry. To verify that he's coming in correctly. So that is indeed the entrance. I would be verifying with the score that he is coming in correctly. God, it always takes me a second with this small lettering to find the correct lines, but here he is right here. So that's all the violin 1 and just violin 1 and divisi, the top octave, bottom octave. And so they're coming in just before 40 there. So I just made sure that all these things are coming in at the correct place. So again, this is kind of a tedious part of this process. There's nothing very creative about. You just have to line up all of your video. And then essentially what I do now, I drag down, make sure his audio isn't coming through, and I just export and save each audio track, each musician from Final Cut. So then I'm generating all these new, clean, well-trimmed videos. I know exactly when they begin and end. All right, and so if there's any problems as far as where people came in or anything like that, I can address that. Sometimes there's errors in the parts, that kind of stuff. So again, so I'm just going to export all of these things, get them ready to be chomped up and digestible for Motion, which is really where all the magic happens. So we're going to go over to Motion now. It sounded so weird. Motion now. Let's open up Motion. All right. Why don't I start a new project, just a blank project in Motion, so I can show you the capabilities of this program. So again, kind of familiar setup. We have a timeline. There's a playhead that moves forward and backward in time. I can move it wherever I want, click it. There's the where it tells me the amount of seconds and down to the frame. I made this project 24 frames a second. And this main window is where we're going to see all of our assets, our videos, and there's also an area here where you can see all our layers, which is essentially, if you put videos in there, they're all going to appear there. I'm not even going to pull the audio in right now because we don't really need it right now. So I'm just going to give you a sample of how you can manipulate video layers and we can do cool stuff with them, essentially. So let's go to our edited. And by the way, just a note, also I did all of the lining up in Final Cut with all of the choir as well. So I kind of lined up all of those elements. I made another stack of all of the choir, exported each of those individually. So now they're all ready to go. I have these 3 folders, choir, edited choir vids. Here's alto, in alphabetical, I guess. Alto, bass 1, 2, soprano, and tenor 1 and 2. I've got my edited music videos, not music videos, musician videos. We've got all the instruments here ready to go. They're all labeled. I even included their names just to be detailed, I guess. A separate folder for our soloists. Sebastian's video is in here somewhere. Okay, so we're just going to click and drag over some videos just to show you what Motion can do. I can actually just pull this right over to Motion. There I am. What a handsome devil. I know, just being silly. So if I hold Shift, grab one of the corners here, it will resize and preserve the aspect ratio. I'm just going to make this small enough to sort of see what I'm doing. So essentially what I had to do for the entire symphony, starting with the violins, violas, so forth, I would just pull in all of the videos. I had, essentially however many, 80, 90 musicians. I made them incredibly small, right, so I could see them all. I lined them approximately up on this board. And so that's sort of what I'm giving you a preview of that process. So let's pull over James as well. Let's resize them approximately, just very quickly. Let's pull over Mike. Let's bring him down here. Let me pull Derek in here, covering his face. He looks like, oh, what is he doing? All right, wiping off his chops, whatever. Brass players are weird, aren't we? Okay, so we have a row, and just for the sake of demonstration, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make 2 separate rows without overwhelming my computer here. I'm just going to make 2 and 2. So I'm going to take these 2 guys, I'm going to put them back here as like a separate row. So in the actual video, I had, violin row 1, violin row 2, viola row 1, 2, so forth. I put the cellos in there. Everybody's kind of layered in a certain way in 3-dimensional space. I'm going to show you how this works. We're just going to kind of tidy this up. So I have a group over here in the layers window. I'm going to call this group trombone. And then I'm going to make 2 new groups. I'm going to call it row 1 and row 2. And I'm just going to put a group within a group. We're going to make an inception of groups here. I'm going to put myself and James in row 1 because we're going to be to the fore. I'll show you what's fore. And we're going to put these guys in row 2. All right. So now we have our rows all neat and tidy, and essentially if I click on row 2, this group, it selects this whole group and I can manipulate it and move it as one unit. So that's very handy when you have a whole row of violins or whatever. You can move them together, you can manipulate them in the space. I'm just going to pull these guys down just behind them a bit, and now I'm going to show you the 3D capability of this program. Let's pull them into the middle of our composition here. Now what I'm going to do is the beauty of this program. I'm going to create a new camera. Essentially the camera is a tool that allows you to change your view dynamically. So essentially, we're making a virtual camera, and it's giving me the option of switching to 3D. I'm going to do that. So it gives me the option of manipulating things in sort of a 3D space. So if I click the camera here, and there's this little HUD in the left here, the left of my screen, it allows me to adjust things. So sort of the depth of it, left and right, up and down. And the best way to do this is probably just to show you. So if I rotate the camera, essentially what I'm doing is rotating the view around these elements. I can spin all the way around, I can go up, I can go down, rotate. I'm just kind of rotating right now. That kind of gives you an idea of what it's doing. The first time I started messing with this program, it just blew me away. I love messing with this stuff. You can kind of push forward and back where it's sort of the camera is moving towards the element that it's filming. We can move up and down. Just anything you can imagine. X, Y, Z axes is the sky is the limit. So what we're going to do is, now that we can see everything in three-dimensional space, I'm going to kind of pull around to the side here, and you can kind of see that these videos are kind of stuck together. They're in the same plane. And so what we're going to do is create some depth. So I'm going to click row 2, and you can either use these controls here to push forward, or there's this little arrow, these little arrows I can move up and push things back or spin them around. So if I just click that blue arrow, it allows me to push it back, sort of in a three-dimensional space. I'm going to say that a lot here. And so now we have some depth established between the rows. If I click on the camera again, just to kind of show you what's happening, now we see, whoa. All right, if I can kind of see the top view so I can see what's happening. All right, and then the beauty of this program, this is how I constructed all the different shots of what was happening in the piece, is you're able to create a dynamic camera move. You can start the camera in one angle, in one position, and you can end the camera in another position. Literally any combination you can imagine, angle, position in space. It creates all of the data to make that move from that position to the other position. So essentially, you're making what's called key frames. So the key frame is essentially saving data in one position, changing that data in another position. So let me just show you how that works. By the way, we're back in our timeline here. Here's all our assets, all our videos that are all lined up. And our camera is also sort of showing up as an element here. So I select the camera right around, I guess right now we're at 10 seconds, 11 frames. I'm going to hit the record button right here on the timeline. What that does is essentially records whatever change I'm going to make. It makes a new keyframe. So the keyframe is key. If I push in a little bit, you can see it made a little red dot right here. And that red dot is saving the location data of our camera, of our virtual camera. So if I move here, then I'm going to move forward in time. I'm going to move the playhead, I don't know, let's move it a few seconds ahead. I zoomed out there just to kind of see where we are. How about to 14 seconds? So I'm going to make sure I'm selected on the camera. I'm going to now change the angle. I'm going to rotate. We're going to assume that this is what I want the shot to be. Maybe I'll even push in and I'll come down and I'll push in some more. This is going to be a very abrupt move. We'll move to the left. We'll push in some more. So again, when I say push in, I'm just moving the camera closer, essentially. There's also a zoom feature that I didn't really ever use too much. In fact, here's what we're going to do. Say that, all right, so we're going to preview this. I'm going to move the playhead back. All right, so now it has created a camera move, which is pretty cool. It saved the data from the camera started and when the camera ended. And it ended kind of abruptly there. We can fix that. But also, I just want to show you, right now we're in the camera view. We're seeing what the camera sees. And that's this control here. We can select active camera. You also have the ability to name your camera. So we're just going to call this opening shot, and I created a new camera for every one of my new shots in the Mahler. So I'd be like, Janai, alto soloist, moving to here, and I would name that camera that, and then once I was done with that shot, I would just start a new camera so I could start fresh. So essentially, every time you see a cut in the Mahler, I was creating a new camera and designing a whole new shot. All right, so I just love this program. This is such cool stuff. So again, we can change views and just see what's going on. I'm going to select this little selector tool. I'm going to select top. So essentially what it allows me to do is see what's happening from the top down. So these little lines, if you were to imagine us on a ladder or a dolly just looking straight down in the action, this is our back row here. From the very top, the reason it's a little line is because it has no depth. It's giving us just a line. And there's our front row. And this yellow little area here, that's our camera. You can see there's a little camera icon. And this triangle thing is the field of view. So it's sort of what the camera is doing. And now if we press play again, it's showing us what the camera is doing. It's showing us the camera move itself. And so you can actually manipulate from this view as well. You see this little path, this red line is showing us the path of the camera. And I can even manipulate, I can even create a new keyframe. Let's say we wanted to create one. I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but I'm going to click on the opening shot camera. Now this little button here allows us to see details of these keyframes. Right now we just have these kind of vague red dots. We know it saved some data here. Let's see what data it saved. So I click this keyframe, these little points. Look at all this stuff. So there's all these points, there's lines that it connected, and then these other points. And we can see by color coding, it's got transform position X, position Y, Z, and then we have the transform rotation. So essentially it's the data in which the camera has saved when it's moving in three-dimensional space and rotating. And there's also many other things you can change. You can even change focus. We can talk about that. So the camera is rotating. There is the keyframe data. And say I want to make another keyframe. And then you can actually click these little buttons to make another keyframe on all of these elements. Say I wanted to, you can do one of them or all of them. And that also appears up here. Here's our keyframe. So let's say, man, I'm getting to the nitty gritty here. But if I go into the inspector properties up on the left-hand side, this shows us our position data for where the camera is, right? So you see how these numbers change because everything is moving. You can even click these arrows to move between your keyframes. So instead of trying to move the playhead to align exactly with these dots, with these keyframes, anybody that's used any sort of video editors and has messed with this, this is a really great feature. So I can just move, and you notice it moved the playhead to these different data points. All right, so essentially when I'm making my shot, I start my beginning point where I want to start, I send my end point. I might make some intermediary points, and then and I try to make it flow. So I was just going to show you from the top view, you can even manipulate these points here from the top view so I can kind of see where the camera goes. And you can see that made the camera kind of spin around in a weird way, and we'll see how that affected it in the active camera view. Now what does it look like? It looks like it did something weird. So we don't even necessarily need that. Let's go to the top. In fact, we don't even need to go to the top. Let's go to active camera. We're just going to click this keyframe right here, and we're going to delete it. So I use that feature all the time, and then you can even move the keyframes in time. Say I wanted this whole shot to end, and I just wanted it to take longer. I just wanted to enjoy the move. We can just move that keyframe a little later. Now our move is, instead of being a few seconds, 4 or 5, it's now 5 or 6 seconds long, or however long we made it. So it's a very gradual move. And lastly, again, you see how abrupt that ending was? Boom, and then it ended. We don't like that, right? It looks weird. It'd be like if the cameraman just jolted the camera. So what we're going to do, you can select these keyframes in this keyframe view. If I right click, I'm going to click ease out. And you see what that did? I'm just going to undo. You see these lines, they're very straight, and then I'm going to redo that. Okay, there we go. Very smooth. So when it begins the motion, it's essentially going to ease in. It'd be like if you were just gradually pushing the camera very slowly at first to kind of ease the viewer into the motion. And then the same thing when you arrive. Right now we're still probably in an abrupt ending. So let's ease into the ending of the move. With these data points where the camera arrives, we're going to right click. We're just going to go ease into that move. And again, you see how that changed the contour of that line, made it like kind of a sexy looking line. So now we have the resultant move is much better. And even I would probably even take a little more time to make that move. I'd probably zoom in much more depending on what was going on. So I'm trying to shape each shot so that it's really capturing what's going on in the orchestra and that the shot itself has some cool and dynamic character to it. So let's exit out of this demonstration, and just as the chef would do, let's go to the project I prepared earlier. I'll show you just a little bit of this, if you can stick with me. We're just hanging out here. All right. And my computer is going to take a second to load this up. Oh, okay, so we're already we're already starting in the top view of one of my shots. I was going to show you, so into the piece, at some point I did load, just to show you what I've done here. This is a copy of a project, so everything says copy after it, but I've got Sebastian Langlessing, our conductor, here. I've got our soloist. It's all of these, the orchestra is one group, and within that group, we've got an inception of groups. Violin, cello, all the various rows within the cellos and viola, which are one group in this instance. And so let me just show you I'm going to move ahead a little bit and just show you what the camera is seeing in this shot. So right now we're about 7 minutes, 27 seconds into the piece. We're going to, in just a second, it'll take the camera or the computer a while to load this, but let's see if it does. Oh, this would be a good time to cut to a shot of Kitty. Oh, here we go. Okay, so if we look at our composition, we have the choir in the background. We've got a bit of the organ, which I can show you how I did that. Got the percussion. We can see I wanted to make sure almost at all times, not all the time, but I wanted everybody's face to be visible, if at all possible. Sometimes it just wasn't needed, depending on where the focus of the camera was. But in this case, if it's a wide shot, I want everyone to be visible. So we see Sebastian. We have his back view. I had Sebastian also record himself from the rear, somewhere in the middle of the piece to the end, because I knew I'd be using him in these shots from the rear. It would look weird if he was turned around to the audience conducting in this type of setup. So we have a shot in the middle here that ends on this. And you see here, this is SLL spin copy. That's the name of the camera that I set here. Again, the copy is because I copied this whole project and it added the word copy to everything. But SLL spin. So we're going to back up. You see our little keyframes? That's all the little data points of where I told the camera to be at certain times. So I'm just going to back up to the beginning of that shot. So I'm backing the playhead up. Again, because there's so many video elements on the virtual stage right now, my computer's like, So we're just going to give it a second. Maybe we should cut to a shot of Kitty again. Boom. Okay. So in this portion of the video, I wanted to spin around from Sebastian's front, close-up of him conducting, and spin all the way around to his backside. and zoom the camera back, pull the camera back to see all the performers. So because this is so graphics intensive, I'm not ever able to preview with all of the elements enabled. So what I do is I go in to the layers and I actually disable some of these elements just so I can let my processor see one thing. Again, because if you're trying to play like 150 videos at once, the computer's like, ugh. So what we're going to do, we're going to go into layers, we're going to do a little cheat. I'm going to disable the entire orchestra. Not a good phrase to say, but just for now. Disable the choir, the organ. We don't even really need the soloist right now because they're done singing. They were just nice enough to keep their video going so they could be present. Okay, so now we're going to preview the move that I've created at this moment. So right now we're just going to look at Sebastian's video. So right now I have Sebastian's front side here, and then as we spin around, I also have the video element that is his rear view sandwiched together in the same space, so that when we rotate around, then you'll see his backside, his rear view. Right, so right now we can only see Sebastian. The other elements should be here, but I just wanted to preview what that move is. Now let's also, just to show you what the camera is doing, let's go to the top view like we did before. And just to show you again the camera move, if it'll show me. Here we go. And we're going to try to preview that if it'll let me. Oh, it's not even showing. Oh, come on. There we go. So now what we're seeing is at the beginning of the shot, if I just drag it back, here's the camera. Here's the camera's field of view pointing towards Sebastian here. And here's the red path is all the keyframes and the path in space that it actually takes. So I created a shot with certain data points. I tried to smooth it out. So the camera spins around and kind of pulls to the side, backs up, keeps rotating, backs up some more, rotates to the front, and then it just kind of pulls back for the sort of grandiose effect of showing the rest of the performers. So I had to get creative with creating these shots because, again, the only way to see these shots, I had to kind of see where the camera is beginning and where it's ending. Even if I had super amazing computer that could chunk through anything, I have a feeling that even at low resolution settings, you wouldn't be able to see all these video elements playing at the same time. But maybe I should upgrade and see what happens. So I'm just gonna, okay, so just to give you the workflow idea, so essentially from the beginning of the piece, I created a new camera for every shot, created the shot, and I just saved that little puzzle piece. I saved, say, I don't know, from time 0 to 15 seconds from the viola coming to the Janai, the alto soloist. And I did a little bit of focus effects as well. So so what I did is I saved each of these out of motion, made a little video file. Then I had a collection of video files that I labeled with numbers and descriptions and the time where they came in. Then I pulled them all back into Final Cut, where sort of the granddaddy compilation occurs. So if I just pull up Final Cut and I show you the final product here, final project, you see all these with numbers are each individual shot. Each of these individual shots have been exported individually, can I say individual anymore, from Motion. Because there's just too much processing power from Motion to kind of set up all of these different things and have me preview them. So with Final Cut, I was able to see the resultant file. For example, the beginning shot was just essentially, if you can imagine in Motion, I'm pulling the camera back, and I even had a little focus effect. So there's just a very subtle focus change here, and essentially you can probably guess how I did that with keyframes. So you set the focus of the camera on a certain element, You save that data with a keyframe, and you can move the focus with a keyframe. So as we play this, so just because I wanted to, I moved the camera over just a bit, and I racked the focus from Chennai to the basses just for that note. And there's other moments moving forward where I put things in and out of focus. For example, coming from the basses to John. So as the camera moves, it's kind of showing moving the focus from here to there, as perhaps a actual camera would do. And there's just other instances like that. So essentially, each of these shots, I had to do numerous takes sometimes because some part of the move, maybe the camera keyframes weren't exactly right. It wasn't quite smooth enough. Maybe the way the video tiles were lining up was a little weird. Maybe some of the things were out of sync. I'm still seeing sync issues, with this project. But then I can add my, essentially, I can see the shot in Final Cut that I exported from Motion. I add my fades. Again, we're looking at a little bit of focus effect. We're focusing mostly on the trombones, of course. What else? And just because the choir is resting, we have them out of focus. So I did that just for some of the shots. And just trying to, sometimes I added a fade, sometimes I wanted a hard cut where it just cut directly from one thing to the other. So that, in effect, is mostly the workflow. That's pretty much what I did for this project. Towards the end, it was a lot of just waiting for Motion to render and make the shot. So once we get, say, all the way to the end, and let's just talk a little bit about the organ. So we have all these performers on stage. So we have just kind of a basic rotation move. It's very easy to set this up. You just have to make sure, you see how everything is lined up. There's a certain amount of depth with all the rows. Just trying to make sure that it looks tidy enough to sort of look like they're on stage, right? And we are, in effect, virtually on stage. So we have this organ pipes image, very generously donated by Alamo Heights United Methodist Church with help of Mary Lou Russell. So actually, I took video of it. I have the still image I pulled from the video, and just to give you a little bit of Photoshop, I'm sure many of you have messed around with photo editors or Photoshop, and all of us have heard the term, it's Photoshopped, right? Photoshop is the standard. I've been using this thing for years and years and years. It is a fantastic program. So I just took the image of the organ pipes, which is just sort of a great backdrop for this project. It was great to put that in here as a visual. Let's go to organ pipes. And I'm just gonna pull over the image, the original image of the organ pipes at Alamo Heights United Methodist Church. Whoa, let's get out of that. All right, so I just zoom in on that, and just sort of to show a sort of a basic cutout, we go to our lasso tool, which essentially allows you to select a certain thing in this project. I'm gonna, instead of using free lasso, which just allows you to kind of select with a free mouse, free hand, I'm gonna go to polygonal, and I'm just gonna, again, just select certain points here. This is going to be very rough. All right, bam, boom, sure, that, okay. Lots of clickies. And we'll come over here and we'll close it up here. All right, you see now we have the crawling ants, which is our selection. Just to show you how easily we can do this, we can right click, select inverse. So instead of selecting what's inside, it's selecting what's outside. I'm just gonna hit delete. There you go. There's just a wonderful job in Photoshop. So obviously I took a lot of time to get every single little pixel beautifully. as beautifully as I could cut out. So let me just show you as the chef would do. Here is the one I actually did, which is a little bit cleaner, right? And so we have this sort of white background, which is essentially nothingness. It's the transparency built into the image. So if I save this as a TIFF image file, and I go ahead and import that into Motion, and we won't even mess with Motion because it takes so long, but the resultant thing is I faded that into the background here. Here it is in Final Cut. And I faded that in with Seth Nelson here playing organ. And so that is just a cool surprise having that pop up as a visual, and we get to see that in later shots as well. So again, part of my workflow as well was listening to this piece and trying to think of the coolest shots that I could do that would work well and be appropriate for the moment. So I actually had a little list. I had sticky notes galore for this project. So many lists and lists upon lists and all kind of stuff. Sticky notes. I'm gonna go to violins here. I'm gonna make a move here. Some of them didn't work. You know, I would try them again. So many different things to coordinate here. I was so happy I was finally able to get it all to come together. The last thing I'd like to talk about is just the virtual audience. So what we had asked, I'd sort of reached out to not only our performers, but just the mass audience, the intranets of people. And I just asked if people would just clap for a certain amount of seconds. Little tidbit, I actually also asked them to be silent in the beginning, because I was thinking about adding a shot of Sebastian conducting with the virtual audience in the background, but it proved to be just so much trouble. I decided just to use the clapping only, just kind of reveal the audience as a surprise. I think it ends up being more effective where the audience is a surprise. So right after the piece is done, we have the virtual audience fading in. I've made you can imagine me having to lay out all of these video tiles into rows and creating just a hair of depth, moving them all back in the virtual space, and then you just keyframe the camera left to right, and there's a little bit of rotation in that shot. And then I had asked the musicians in the ending of their recordings just to acknowledge the virtual audience. And so you see that everyone is acknowledging, looking at each other, doing stuff. All right, so they kind of had to suspend disbelief when I asked them to do this. I said, just acknowledge that there's going to be an audience, and I think they did really well. So then we go back to this final shot showing kind of how many people are in this virtual audience. I think we had somewhere around 400 to 500 people total, which is great. I told everyone I wanted so many people, I wanted it to break my computer. I don't think it quite did it. But anyway, we have these shots at the end. Actually, because the videos were so small, so compressed from people's cell phones at the clapping, doing the shots of the virtual audience was actually easier for my computer to do than this shot here, because these are just massive files. So anyway, that was just a little bit of my world for the last couple months. It was a lot of fun. I had a lot of goosebump moments when I got the piece just right. It was so much fun. As I admitted earlier in the video, there are some tedious moments that you kind of joined me and saw what I had to do, but honestly, it was in service of a really cool project, and I was really happy to do it and share it with you all. So thank you so much for hanging out with me and joining me. And I don't really have an ending catchphrase, so I'll just leave you with a shot of Adventure Cat, my cat. Thanks, everybody. And root beer.